Well, good morning and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, and we are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. And boy, do we have a lot to get to. Of course, the president made a prime time address last night. We'll be talking about that, what the talking heads had to say about it. And, of course, the speaker's race. We'll talk about that as well. First, I received a comment after the program yesterday that I thought I would highlight. And we do have a couple of local events that I want to highlight later on as well if we have the time. First up, hopefully, there we go. Great interview with Tom Reed. We had former Congressman Tom Reed on the program yesterday. And full disclosure, my former boss. I was his communications director for a little while. And he's been talking about China for quite some time now, and I want to get to that in just a second. He is so right about China. They are trying to take over the world and are behind so much of all the chaos of everything, everywhere. They may be out in the open doing this. That means if you are not against them, you are for them. As for Speaker of the House, I hope these few people do not ruin it for all America. I also think that all those people running down America and Israel should be made to rescind all the lies. Some, I won't say rescind, but I will say that some are walking it back. They're starting to see the repercussions for spewing hate and spewing anti-Semitism. We'll get to that in just a little bit. But before that, to that viewer's point about Tom Reed's interview, he talked extensively about the threat of China, the very real threat of China and Russia wanting to be the world superpower. Coming from the Washington Post this morning, how apropos, China's nuclear arsenal on track to double by 2030. That's what the Pentagon is reporting. China has developed an arsenal of more than 500 operational nuclear warheads and is set to double that number by the end of the decade, exceeding previous Pentagon estimates. That's according to the Defense Department report. So something to keep a close eye on, as was mentioned on yesterday's program. Okay, let's talk about Israel. We're going to talk about what the president had to say last night, the reaction to that, but also on the back end of this, the media's coverage in general of what's happening. Also, we'll talk about the squad. We'll talk about these professors, these dentists, these college students, these Citibank employees that are all spewing this hate. But first, and this is very troubling and something to keep in mind if you have anybody that you know abroad, the U.S. has issued what they call a rare, in this article, a rare worldwide caution alert Thursday, urging Americans who are overseas to, quote, exercise increased caution due to, quote, increased tensions in various locations around the world. That's a statement from the U.S. Department of State. We recommend that U.S. citizens who choose not to depart prepare contingency plans for emergency situations. Now, the United Kingdom and Germany have issued similar warnings to their citizens as well. So that ties in with the unrest throughout essentially the world. Now, President Biden, before we go to break, just to highlight what we're going to talk about, he gave his primetime address last night from his return from Israel. What he had to say, we're not going to go through the whole speech, of course, but some of the things that he had to say, some of the response. But what's most important is your response. What did you think? Did you catch the speech last night? Were your thoughts? Some have said it was very inspirational, very powerful. Some have questioned the connection of Ukraine funding and Israel funding. Not happy that that's being put together as one package. We'll talk about it when we come back. We're going to go quick this morning. Oh, and by the way, it's just you and I. I've decided we've had so many guests, and we will continue to have so many guests, specifically till November 7th, probably. But I thought this would be a nice time to settle in, relax, and spend the morning together. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Look at that beautiful view of Market Street, downtown Corning on this Friday morning. And we have, look at this now, 2 virtual waves coming. Not as many people walking on the street. We're not getting in-person waves. If you're new to the program, you see the little wave counter on the bottom of the screen. We just have fun with it. One quick mention before we go to President Biden's speech last night. I wanted to highlight this because we've talked about the military and the question of signing up for the military. We've had opinion piece after opinion piece of, for whatever reason, some have blamed it on woke culture in the military. Some have blamed it on the media's, I don't know what you'd want to say, negative coverage of our military. And we see how important they are in times like these. Congressman Nick Langworthy, and I'm gonna put this up on the screen. There's a lot of information here, but I will kind of explain a little bit of it too as we go along here. Congressman Nick Langworthy is going to host a virtual information session on military service academies. This is next Thursday, as you see there on your screen. The congressman will host a virtual information session for local high school students and their parents to learn more about nominations and applications for the 5 military service academies. Now, they will be joined by representatives from the 5 academies: the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, the U.S. Air Force Academy, the U.S. Naval Academy, the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, and the U.S. Coast Guard Academy. Now, applications to be considered, you see there at the bottom, towards the bottom of your screen. They're due on November 1st, but there will be an extension to November 15th if you attend this seminar or information session. Seminar sounds boring. Information session, or if you become interested in the last few days, because it is a process. Now, there's an application online. I do not have that information, or at least in a way that I can get that to you on screen. So you see the contact information. You can ask them if anybody you know, a family member, child, a grandchild, that would be interested in this. That's why I wanted to get that information to you. Okay, let's get back to the president's speech. He said the U.S. holds the world together. American leadership is what holds the world together. American alliances are what keeps us, America, safe. Hamas and Putin represent different threats, but they share this in common. They both want to annihilate a neighboring democracy. Now, Biden is going to ask, if you want to know the specifics, he's going to ask Congress for $100 billion in new spending, including $60 billion for Ukraine and $14 billion for Israel. That's what I guess you could say anonymous source has told Reuters. The request will also include $10 billion for humanitarian aid, $14 billion for border security, our border, and $7 billion for the Indo-Pacific region, the source said. Half of the $60 billion is requesting for Ukraine, that Biden is requesting for Ukraine, would go towards replacing and modernizing U.S. weapons stocks. Now, Biden says support for Israel and Ukraine is vital for our security as well. History has taught us that when terrorists don't pay a price for their terror, when dictators don't pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos and death and more destruction. They keep going, and the cost and the threat to America and the world keep rising. Now, if you happen to see the speech last night, I would love to hear your opinion on it, because I've heard really both sides, and we're going to, as we try to do on this program, give you both sides to that. One last thing that the president, that I want to mention, because I don't want to go through the whole speech, but he warns, how do I want to word this? Well, I'll just quote him. We must, without equivocation, denounce anti-Semitism. And I know there's been a problem within his own party on that. We must also, without equivocation, denounce Islamophobia. And to all you hurting, those of you hurting, I want you to know I see you. You belong. And I want to say this to you. You're all American. You're all American. Now, some people, because of the, and there's a piece that we might get to later on, but because of the really anti-Semitic rallies that have been going on throughout the country. Some have been critical that he combined the two in the speech. But denouncing, of course, we should all be denouncing any form of hate in that manner. We'll talk about a really good piece, and I hope we get a chance to get to it. But it was basically, and we've had numerous ones like this throughout the last month, that is hate is really showing itself through this. Now, Brit Hume from Fox News, he praised this speech from President Biden. How are we doing on time? You know what? I'm going to tell you what he had to say when we come back. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. And we are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here in Corning, the beautiful Marcus Street that you just saw on your screen. I just received a comment during break, and let's go to it. That's not the one, obviously. Oh, I thought I changed it. Okay, well, let's see if I can get to it on the fly. What do you think there? There we go. That should have been this one. Citizens who break the laws can lose their rights. Perhaps the various media outlets should be subject to the same fate. Looking at the world fire burning, I see the media holding the match. Media outlets that are proven to misreport the news should lose their license to propagate misinformation. I will say that's tricky. I understand the reasoning behind that thought, and I would very much agree that the media is holding the match. I think there's no denying it after they used what is essentially a press release from Hamas to suggest that Israel had bombed that hospital. But the problem is, obviously, well, we have First Amendment. That's not a problem. That's a good thing. But I would also say what scares me out something like that is who gets to decide. If it's you and me, I'm fine with it. But that may not be the case. We've seen some outlets lose their license or with the threat of losing their license, stations because of reporting on what they felt were questionable election results after Trump lost, talking about that it was, what's going on with the court cases, stolen and like that. So when they report on it, FCC and others get to judge should they have a license. So again, that may sound good because I'm with you. I hate to see them push this misinformation that's gotten so many people hurt, has gotten people killed. But I don't think censorship is the answer. But I do think, and I think it was, I know it was at the time President Trump, but I always get mixed up with libel and slander. But I know he wanted to change the laws on that, which I think had maybe some merit. But that's a tricky road when you go down there. Okay, Brit Hume. He said he was asked on the Fox News. Brit Hume asked, and I'm just giving you everybody's opinion. Not everybody's, as many opinions as I can on the president's speech last night. He was asked what he thought of Biden's speech. He said, I think it may be remembered as one of the best, if not the best, speeches of his presidency. He was firm, he was unequivocal, he was strong, as he has been particularly in recent days before he went to Israel and while he was over there. I was struck by the fact that he spent as much time as he did on Ukraine. And I think it was a good thing that he did, because the aid for Ukraine package that he's talking about and further aid to Ukraine beyond that is in jeopardy. And I think that he has hampered a little bit, he's been hampered a little bit in that effort by the fact that he dare not really mention the best reason. I mean, he mentioned broadly speaking the best reason for sticking with it in Ukraine, which is, quote, what would the rest of the world and its evildoers think if we pulled out of there? Because that comes on the heels of his having pulled out of Afghanistan, which arguably emboldened all of our adversaries around the world, particularly Vladimir Putin. So that's Brit Hume's take on it. To his point at the end of that quote about showing that weakness to our adversaries. And we had that great piece by Rich Lowry yesterday that said, does the world look at Biden as strong? Because they did Trump. They didn't know what his response would be. And that's why for all intents and purposes, we had peace and prosperity during the Trump administration. And now we have the world on fire under Biden. So he asked, and he didn't give an answer, he asked a question. Does our adversaries look at Biden as a strong leader or a weak leader? CNN had just one takeaway. Normally they have a bunch of takeaways from speeches, and this is Stephen Collinson. So when we come back from this break, if you know anything about Stephen Collinson, this should get interesting. The number one takeaway from President Joe Biden's Oval Office address. From CNN, Stephen Collinson. I think you'll be interested. When we come back, stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We're broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. We're proud to be broadcasting here. We got a lot of road noise this morning. Stephen Collinson said the number one takeaway from President Joe Biden's Oval Office address, and this is really interesting. You've heard me say on the program that the campaign message from Joe Biden is going to be Trump is a threat to democracy. That if you want to save democracy, you have to vote for Biden. That's going to be his point. We've heard it a lot already. And that's sort of what Stephen Collinson took away from Biden's speech last night. His answer was that Israel and Ukraine were fighting existential struggles and that their wars were not just their own, but were critical to the security of each American watching the primetime speech. But the most profound takeaway from what was only his second Oval Office address was this. While Biden scheduled the appearance to discuss two nations fighting for their survival against outside attack, his real topic was America itself and perceived threats to its foundational values in a volatile political age. So without saying it, because there's a piece that Dan McLaughlin has at the New York Post that basically says what Stephen Collinson is trying to hide, which is this was a political speech. He sought, this again, Stephen Collinson, he, meaning Biden, sought to inspire it, meaning America, to reject intolerance as bitter politics rage at home. Biden's words did not unfold in a vacuum. They came against the backdrop of a looming election in which he likely will face former President Donald Trump. In 2024, as in the previous two elections, the nation will likely face a choice between the internationalism and conventional statesmanship of Biden and all his recent predecessors bar Trump, and the American first nationalism of the Make America Great Again movement, which disdains foreign alliances and a traditional U.S. global leadership role. Pro-Trump Republicans do not begrudge defending Israel for reasons partly rooted in the importance to evangelical voters, but would leave Ukraine defenseless against one of those tyrants. Wow, Stephen Collinson painting everybody with a broad brush. So essentially what he's saying is it was a political speech or a look at the campaign side, without saying it, the campaign side and the campaign talking points that we'll see from the president, which is, do you want my form of quote-unquote leadership, or do you want this threat to democracy in Donald Trump? That's going to be his campaign message. Now, I think there's an argument that many would say is, wait a minute, didn't we have peace and prosperity during the Trump administration? And after Afghanistan pulled out by Biden, haven't we had a disaster after disaster, war after war, attack after attack? I think that would be one of the arguments that could be made in response to that talking point from the president. But Dan McLaughlin, as I mentioned, says that this primetime address, so we're giving you, if you're just joining us, giving you every side that we can to Biden's speech last night, the reaction to it. Biden's primetime address, and I'm not going to spend the whole show on this. Biden's primetime address isn't about Israel. It's for his terrible poll numbers, according to Dan McLaughlin. He said Biden obviously has problems if you look at the polls. That's probably what drove him to schedule this big televised speech on Thursday. Aside from the annual State of the Union, this is only the fourth time Biden has given a primetime speech to the nation. We got a virtual wave there. And he went through and talked about the one-year anniversary of COVID was one. In 2022, he gave a speech in Philadelphia on how the midterm elections were a battle for the soul of the country and its democracy against Republicans. Yeah, we heard it from Nancy Pelosi. You're going to hear that a lot, folks. For now, I don't want to go through every speech. For now, the nation is much more united behind Israel, and its cause is more popular. So why is Biden giving a national speech? Because its cause is more popular than Biden is, meaning the cause to protect and defend Israel any way we can is more popular than Biden is. A recent poll coming from CNBC showed disapproval of Biden's presidency hitting a record high 58% and his approval rating at just 37%. The president struggles to crack 2/3 approval within his own party for his handling of foreign policy. Israel's cause is just, and Congress is ready to support it, even with disorganized Republicans having to rely on the interim speaker. So what is Biden planning to do? Wrap himself in the Israel cause. Then insist Republicans vote on a package that combines aid to Israel and Ukraine so that critics of Ukraine aid can be painted as siding with the terrorists against Israel. Dan McLaughlin says that's dirty pool. Congress can and should pass more aid for Ukraine, but the country deserves a debate on the issue, separate from the needs of Israel. Biden got elected because so many Americans wanted Donald Trump gone. This is Dan McLaughlin's opinion from New York Post. Democrats avoided a red wave in 2022, even as Biden's popularity plunged by running against Trump and his stolen election-obsessed allies. Again and again, even as the voters have demonstrated their mistrust of Joe Biden, he has survived just by provoking his enemies. It's the only move he's got. Okay, so that's from Dan McLaughlin. Many, J.D. Vance, Marsha Blackburn, others were slamming Biden for tying the aid together. J.D. Vance actually, let me just read his quote. What Biden is doing is disgusting. He's using dead children in Israel to sell his disastrous Ukraine policy to skeptical Americans. They're not the same countries, they're not the same problems, and his effort to use Israel for political cover is offensive. That's that he says. I'll say heck no, but he didn't put it quite that way. That's J.D. Vance. There's others. Marsha Blackburn. I don't want to go through all these, but said tonight Biden should announce he is freezing $6 billion for Iran, halting aid to Gaza, placing sanctions on Iranian oil, and firing Jake Sullivan. He should not be tying aid to Israel with aid to Ukraine or the border. So there we go. There's a couple comments there. Now, back to the viewer's point before how we doing on time. Good. The viewer's point that said, the media has been it's not just misinformation. It's been harmful to so many people. It's caused riots in the street, essentially, rallies, you could call them, anti-Semitic rallies. It's caused people to be attacked. And, of course, you have politicians that use the media's coverage of it to push their anti-Semitic views. Actually, this was on Andrea Mitchell Reports on MSNBC, of all places, because we've talked a lot about MSNBC's reporting on this, which is very, very questionable. Representative Jared Moskowitz, he's a Democrat from Florida. Keep that in mind, a Democrat from Florida. He said, what I know is we saw a disgusting display of anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, and anti-Semitism from the international media around the world. They immediately took Hamas's word for it. This is about the hospital bombing. And I know he sugarcoats it a little bit by saying international media, so maybe you don't think specifically here, but it's here as well. They took Hamas's, again, essentially a press release, and put it out as actual news. They immediately took Hamas's word for it. Hamas, a terrorist organization who said something and ran with it. It caused riots around the world. It caused the president's meeting to be canceled. But when Israel said it wasn't true, they had to show satellite imagery. They had to show trajectory of the bomb. They had to explain the crater size. So they had to show all sorts of audio intelligence. Yeah, they have to prove themselves. And you still, with some of the wording that people used even after they were caught pushing lies, we'll still wait and see. It's as if they just cannot They can take Hamas's word at it, but with Israel, it's verify, 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 and then we'll still wait and see. But Hamas, their word was taken seriously, says, again, Democrat Representative Jared Moskowitz. So look, this just shows how dangerous it is to be listening to a terrorist organization when they put out numbers, when they put out facts and figures, and they put out statements. And it's a lesson for the media and elected officials that this is an active war zone. And we have to be careful before we take stuff and weaponize it, because look at what it caused in the Arab world. A good point, and it's interesting he made that point on MSNBC of all places. Now, Representative Omar has, I guess you could say, backtracked on accusing Israel of the hospital strike in Gaza. And what did she do? She played the blame game. She blamed the Associated Press, which is fine if you didn't see that article and because it fit your worldview, you instantly shared it. You couldn't have said, wait a minute, let's take a step back. It is a war zone. Let's find out exactly what happened before we push something that is only going to fan the flames of this hatred. Our office, this is a quote from Representative Omar's office, our office cited an AP report yesterday that the IDF had hit a Baptist hospital in Gaza. Since then, the IDF denied responsibility, and the U.S. intelligence assessment is that this was not done by Israel. Now, you notice her office did not apologize for fanning the flames of hatred against Israel. But she called for a fully independent investigation. Going back to Representative Moskowitz's point, and a point that we've been making, Israel can show as much evidence as you could possibly get in a scenario like this, and it's still, we want an investigation. We're not sure. But boy, press release comes out from Hamas, and you run with it. It is critical that we have a fully independent investigation to determine conclusively who is responsible for this war crime. The evidence that Israel has provided is not enough. That means that she will never be happy because, again, she wants it to fit her worldview that Israel is bad and that they can't essentially be trusted. That's her worldview. So she can see something that says Israel bombed the hospital, which is so unlike them, obviously, when you have something that is very much in line with what Hamas does, which we may get to in a moment. But again, her knee-jerk, her initial reaction was to go with Hamas and still does not trust Israel. Imagine that. This needs to be called out, and Senator Tim Scott has a great piece at the New York Post saying we've got to call these people out. We'll get to that in a moment, but we're running just a little bit late, so stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. We are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Just received this message from a viewer. So far, great show. Thank you. Thanks for sharing both sides of opinions on the speech. I think the responses are more noteworthy than the speech itself. I would agree with that. The president's speech left me uninspired. I think, great point. Thank you for everything, by the way. I would agree that people's reactions I found more interesting than necessarily the speech itself. Once I found out, and I have no problem with funding Ukraine. I do believe, as many have said, it can't be a blank check. We have to make sure we know where the money's going. I have no problem with the funding for Ukraine. I have no problem with the funding for Israel, obviously. I think I made that pretty clear. I don't like the package deal idea. I also thought with the speech, when you could read between the lines, that it was very political. Stephen Collinson, he didn't admit it, but he really did admit it. Stephen Collinson from CNN, admitting that it was a political speech without saying it. Okay. Going back to what I promised I would bring up, Tim Scott. He is running for president. Senator Tim Scott says, expel Hamas's propagandists in Congress and don't give the terrorists taxpayer cash. And he gives a little bit of background. It's about a three-page piece. But he says, rather than waiting for the facts, members of Congress and mainstream media outlets carried the narrative of an evil, lying terrorist organization, Hamas. And that's something that I know I'm bringing up a lot on the program this morning, but also throughout the last few weeks, that they were willing to use Hamas's words as essentially a source and not feel strange about that at all. But then when Israel goes all the way to the point where they're leaking or releasing leaked audio, if you want to call it that, or audio that they obtained of the terrorists saying, "Uh-oh, was that us?" kind of thing. None of that, and the trajectory, you saw the videos, and that is still not enough for Representative Omar, who says we still should have an investigation. But your belief was in Hamas at the very beginning. You didn't waver from that. You did not maybe say, ooh, maybe it would be a little sheepish before I cover this. Anyway, back to Senator Tim Scott. I know we shouldn't expect more from the squad, but we cannot have members of Congress being a part of the propaganda machine for Hamas. What a great way of putting that, Senator Tim Scott. It's undeniably crazy. We deserve better. That's why I'm leading the effort in the Senate to stop sending money into Gaza until Israel wipes Hamas off the face of the earth. We cannot send money to Iran or Hamas, period. When you give $6 billion to a country that funds terrorism, you cannot be surprised when they go and do what they always have done. Iran is the lead sponsor of terrorism and Hamas's chief financial backer, yet the Biden administration has no interest in holding it accountable. This is not complicated. It is black and white. These murderers have killed and kidnapped hundreds of Israelis and slaughtered American citizens. There should not be a single U.S. taxpayer dollar that risks ending up in the hands of Hamas. And any member of Congress who gives that group aid, comfort, or justification is in violation of their constitutional oath and must be removed. That's Senator Tim Scott. You can find the full piece at the New York Post this morning. Tim Scott is a candidate for president. Just wanted to mention that. Okay, let's go through a couple of, there's some people that have made comments online. I think you know by now, but if not, I'll give the public service announcement before we go to break. If you think you have, as some people call it, a hot take, you have something you really want to say on X, formerly Twitter, or on Facebook, or whatever social media outlets you use, think twice because they last forever. If you join an organization on college campuses that maybe have questionable beliefs on Hamas, maybe get out of that group before they sign a letter, because these things can have repercussions, and we're seeing it. And we're going to tell you a few examples when we come back. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I get lost in that beautiful view of Marcus Street. Thank you again for joining us on Frankly Speaking on this beautiful Friday morning as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio. I'm your host, Frank Acom. I will be honest, some of these quotes that people have been putting on Twitter or on Facebook that have caused them to get fired, I don't even like repeating them. I don't like giving them the soapbox, but also they're disgusting, they're despicable, they're pure hate. Well, Citibank has fired one of its staffers after and I think this term is appropriate, revolting commentary on Instagram. Nozema, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this right, Nozema Hosanova, 25-year-old former Citibank employer, who has about 4,500 followers. No, really? Well, maybe. I don't know. Doesn't matter. She had, please, I apologize, but this is what she said, and rightfully got fired. No wonder why Hitler wanted to get rid of all of them. With a smiley face emoji. Folks, this one thing that has been made crystal clear since the terrorists in Hamas attacked Israel is you see a lot more open hate. And I think it's also troubling the people that have remained silent. We had that great piece, I believe it was last week. I wish I could remember who wrote it, but it was, you see these more what you'd call like liberal Jewish people that have taken up all the causes, joined Black Lives Matter, whatever the cause, LGBTQ issues, and have really fought for them. Put their tweets out there, their Facebook, they went to rallies, they spent money, they donated, and now when push comes to shove, those same people that those liberal Jews supported are not supporting them. And a lot, and maybe it was Carol Markowitz, but said that's hurt. The silence speaks louder than anything. But you just see this hate. I think I mentioned it with former Congressman Tom Reed yesterday, but this Miami dentist seen tearing down Israeli hostage posters. He was fired as a dentist when he was caught on camera removing missing Israeli hostage posters off street poles across Miami. You know what his excuses now? See, some are now backtracking. Some are making comments. He said his actions were misrepresented. And you know what actually he was doing? As he ripped down posters of missing Israeli hostages, as he's ripping them off the lamppost, he was actually doing it to promote peace. Listen, I've seen some crazy backtracks before, but unfortunately my video of 4 seconds got taken way out of context. It was all misinterpretation, and I think it really sad that it was misinterpreted, as well as the way that my former employer had portrayed it, that it's an act of supporting terrorism. It's the very, very, very contrary. It's to promote peace. It's to de-escalate the situation that we're going through and make sure that our communities are safe. By ripping down posters with photos of Israeli hostages. When we come back from break, you saw the news undoubtedly about the Cornell University professor. We brought it up on the program that made horrible remarks at a pro-Palestinian rally in Ithaca. Well, he has responded. I believe, I can't remember the exact wording that he used, that it enthused him, or it was despicable. Well, he has responded, and we're going to tell you what he had to say when we come back. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on Big Fox. We are back with Frankly Speaking. So as I mentioned, there was a Cornell professor that we talked about earlier in the week, or maybe late last week, that received nationwide criticism of remarks he made at a pro-Palestinian rally that was in Ithaca. He released a statement to the student-run campus newspaper, the Cornell Sun. His name's Russell Rickford. He's an associate professor. He said, "I apologize for the horrible choice of words that I used in a portion of a speech that was intended to stress grassroots African-American, Jewish, and Palestinian traditions of resistance to oppression. I recognize that some of the language I used was reprehensible and did not reflect my values." Before I continue, boy, is there like a boilerplate that you can get somewhere? Because doesn't all these statements seem, except for the guy that was crazy enough to suggest he was promoting peace by ripping down Israeli hostage posters, but reprehensible and did not reflect my values. And what are your values? Out of curiosity, if you felt that word should even be a part of the vocabulary in your rally speech. But I'll continue. As I said in the speech, I abhor violence and the violent targeting of civilians. I am sorry for the pain that my reckless remarks have caused my family, my students, my colleagues, and many others in the time of suffering. As a scholar, a teacher, an activist, and a father, I strive to uphold the values of human dignity, peace, and justice. I want to make it clear that I unequivocally has been a big word lately, oppose and denounce racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, militarism, fundamentalism, and all systems that dehumanize, divide, and oppress people. So with the language he used, I guess, calling it exhilarating and energizing, that terrorist attack on Israel, it was exhilarating and energizing was the term he used. But yet, he denounces all systems that dehumanize, divide, and oppress people. I would say that divides people. Now, Senator Kristen Gillibrand actually called for Rickford's termination from the university. As a person of authority at an educational institution to celebrate murder, rape, and abducting children and slaughtering children, I think he should be fired. There you are. All right. A Columbia professor, before we go to our last break, actually said, because the university president gave just a horrible response to the Israeli-Hamas war, he said, I would never send my daughter here. This is at the school he works. President Shafee, I don't know how to say it, of Columbia University, you are a coward. Where are you, President of Columbia University? We are waiting for you to eradicate all pro-terror student organizations from campus. If my amazing 2-year-old daughter was now 18, I would never send her to Columbia. Not because it's not a great institution, it's an amazing institution, but because I know that she will not be protected there because the president of the university allows pro-terrorists to march on campus. So wouldn't even send his own kid to the place that employs him. One last break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox received this comment during break. I'm not sure. Oh, I forgot it doesn't do emojis. That's what that square box is. I'm not sure how the horrific intentional slaying of innocent children and infants, no matter where they live in the world, can be deserved. And that was supposed to be a heartbreak emoji there. What's wrong with these people? Well, I guess after the fact, you just say they did not reflect your values. I'm with you. I don't understand it. A terrorist attack that they're killing babies, and you somehow find a way. Well, so when I say support it, you share their message to the world, like was done by so many after that the hospital bombing, and you find a way to defend them. It's sickening. I agree with you. I know I said I'd talk about the speaker's race. We're just about out of time. Jordan is going to run third time today. Sounds like the path to the majority is still pretty rocky. Yesterday, if you heard, McHenry was being put up as a kind of a filler, and then it got weird where they said, well, just till January, and it got really, because basically Jordan wanted all the way till January to try to get the votes. It got a little wonky. House lawmakers got a notice on Thursday that no more votes would be expected that day after hours being in limbo. The notice said the House would convene at 10 a.m. today. Jordan's office confirmed to Fox News Digital that the Ohio conservative intends to hold a vote around that time. And of course, like I said, the media is exploiting this. Republican, this is coming from Yahoo, but I can't remember exactly who. Republican disarray leaves House unable to function. Sarah Longwell, an anti-Trump Republican strategist, is that what it says on her business card? The Republicans have proven they are incapable of reaching consensus. We knew that the media was going to exploit this. And with everything going on in Israel, they have been exploiting it effectively. So he's going to go ahead with it. We'll see how it goes. Folks, have a fun, safe weekend. I can't believe the show's over already. I had a great time. I hope you did as well. And I hope that you'll join us Monday morning starting at 7 for Frankly Speaking, only on WYDC TV. Big Fox. I look forward to it already. We'll see you then.